What if the real story behind the repair shop was never about antiques, but about the broken souls restoring each other in silence? Jay Blades, the show's heart, was battling demons no one saw. Suzie Fletcher, calm and composed, carried scars from a past she never spoke about, but behind the cameras, something extraordinary happened. A bond grew, not romantic, not scripted, but deeply human, and now, after years of silence, Jay Blades finally opens up. What he reveals about Suzie Fletcher will change how you see them both forever. This isn't just a story about healing, it's a revelation you won't forget. Jay Blades, the beloved presenter with an easy smile and unmatched charm, didn't always live in the light. At 51 years old, long after he'd become a household name, he still couldn't read. A letter on his kitchen table blurred into a mess of symbols. A cruel reminder that for all his success, there were parts of himself he'd never fixed. His illiteracy, the result of undiagnosed dyslexia, wasn't just a private challenge, it was a lifelong wound. As a boy, he'd stood eagerly in line on career day, only for a teacher to glance at him and say, "Blades, you're going to amount to nothing." He wasn't even allowed to sit in the chair. That one moment planted a deep-rooted doubt. Years of masking, pretending, and charming his way through meetings and paperwork followed. But his difficulties didn't end with reading. Just 5 or 6 years before the repair shop changed everything, Jay hit rock bottom. His marriage collapsed, his business failed, and his mental health deteriorated so badly that he believed he had no future. Friends from the Caribbean community tried to support him, but he couldn't see a way forward. It was only when he began learning restoration skills from kind strangers, like 92-year-old Ken, that the fog began to lift. Ken didn't just teach him how to cane chairs, he taught him how to breathe again. Then came the repair shop. To viewers, it was a charming show about old items and the experts who brought them back to life. But to Jay, it became something deeper. The barn where the team filmed wasn't just a set, it was sanctuary. The scent of wood, the rhythm of tools, the daily routine, it grounded him. Slowly, the act of restoring broken objects helped him begin restoring himself. And then came Suzie Fletcher. When Suzie walked through the barn doors, she didn't come seeking fame or even healing. She came because her brother, Steve Fletcher, encouraged her to join the show. Behind her calm demeanor and mastery of leather work was a woman quietly trying to rebuild. After years of emotional destruction, her husband Rob had passed away from pancreatic cancer in 2013, but grief wasn't straightforward. Their 18-year marriage had been marked by coercive control, quiet manipulation, and years of lost confidence. Suzie described herself then as a broken person, emotionally, physically, mentally lost. When Suzie Fletcher returned to England from the United States, she wasn't escaping, she was rebuilding. After years in a marriage that quietly eroded her confidence, drained her voice, and left her emotionally diminished, the move wasn't a retreat. It was a decision to start over on her own terms. Her craft leather work had always been more than a job. It was a language, a form of order in a world that so often felt chaotic. Saddlery had given her control when everything else slipped through her fingers. Back in her workshop in Oxfordshire, she found familiarity in the scent of worn leather, the repetition of stitches, the grounding rhythm of her tools. It was a safe space, a place where no one asked questions, where healing didn't require words. But when her brother, Steve Fletcher, encouraged her to join the repair shop, Suzie faced an entirely different challenge: television, cameras, exposure. She was stepping into the unknown, and she felt it in every guarded glance, every quiet hesitation. She didn't arrive on set looking to make friends, and certainly not to reveal herself. She came for the work, but what she found was unexpected. Jay Blades, the show's host and a man she had never met before, offered her something incredibly rare: space. No small talk laced with expectations, no probing questions, just quiet presence, a steady companion whose silence spoke louder than conversation. He didn't try to pull stories out of her. He let her work, let her breathe, let her heal. Their connection wasn't something you'd catch in the spotlight. It grew in shadows and pauses between takes and glances across the workshop. In shared cups of tea after a long shoot, there was no performance, just mutual respect, and a gentle understanding that each of them was carrying something heavy. Jay, who knew what it felt like to hide pain behind a smile, instinctively gave Suzie what she needed most: the freedom to exist without explanation. He'd linger nearby, not close enough to crowd her, but near enough to be felt. When her confidence trembled, he'd offer nothing more than a nod or a smile, and somehow, that was enough. As Suzie began to feel safe, she also began to imagine doing something she'd long avoided, telling her story. The idea of writing a memoir had haunted her for years, to raw, to painful. But during a joint appearance on This Morning, when the topic arose, Jay leaned in softly and said, "Come on, Suze, you can do this. It'll be cathartic." That moment stayed with her. Eventually, she picked up the pen and began writing The Sun Over the Mountains, a memoir that would unlock memories long buried and, in doing so, help her reclaim the voice she thought she had lost forever. Writing was painful, but healing. She didn't write for sympathy or spotlight. She wrote to understand herself again. Through the process, Jay never asked to read the manuscript. He never demanded to know what she was revealing. He just kept showing up quiet, consistent, supportive, and that consistency mattered more than anything. But it wasn't just Suzie Fletcher who was healing inside that timber-framed barn. As she quietly stitched her past back together, Jay Blades found himself facing parts of his own history he had buried long ago. Her silence spoke volumes, echoing his. Her strength, the kind that doesn't need attention or applause, became a mirror reflecting not just her resilience, but the depth of Jay's own unprocessed pain. Watching her heal forced him to reckon with how far he'd come and just how far he still had to go. Viewers of the repair shop began to notice something different. There was a certain energy between Jay and Suzie, something unspoken yet unmistakable. The way they moved around each other, the way they shared glances and gave each other space, it was a language all its own, not loud, not obvious, but deeply present. Those who watched closely could sense it. These two weren't just colleagues. Rumors started swirling. Was it friendship? Was it something more? A romance? Perhaps. Speculation flooded comment sections and social media threads. Fans wanted a name for what they saw, a definition for what they felt. But Jay and Suzie never offered one. They didn't have to, because some connections defy categories. What Jay and Suzie shared wasn't built for headlines or hashtags. It was rooted in healing, in recognition, in the sacred understanding that only those who have been broken in similar ways can truly share. Yet behind the cameras, Jay Blades was fighting a war of his own. His personal life had become tabloid fodder after his ex-wife made public accusations of coercive behavior. Though Jay never addressed the claims in detail, the shadow of that revelation followed him, and with his rising fame, TV specials, book deals, ambassador roles, the pressure to maintain a calm, composed image became overwhelming. The weight of his silence, once protective, began to crush him from the inside. Then, in a moment that was never meant to be public, off script, off record, Jay broke. "I was protecting her," he said softly, referencing Suzie Fletcher and myself, from the parts of me that nearly destroyed everything. He didn't talk about love with flowers or fireworks. He spoke of survival, of recognition. He admitted that Suzie's quiet presence pulled him back from the edge, not with speeches or grand gestures, but simply by being there. She saw him, truly saw him, when he was most vulnerable, and she didn't flinch. "I was afraid," he said, "of letting anyone see how fragile I really am. But Suzie Fletcher, she changed me." It was a confession that answered all the questions, yet posed even more, a truth that was both intimate and elusive. Because this was never about scandal, it was about grace. It was about how two people, both wounded in different ways, found each other not to fix, but to walk beside. Not to save each other, but to simply say, "I'm here." The barn at the repair shop was never just about fixing things. Over time, it became something deeper, a sacred space where memories were mended, and hope was quietly stitched back together. Radios that once played lullabies, teddy bears worn thin with love, and heirlooms shattered by time were all given a second chance. But something else was being slowly, gently restored in that barn. Jay and Suzie themselves. In between the soldering and sewing, trust was rebuilt, stories were shared, and old wounds began to heal. Today, Jay continues his journey beyond the barn. Once struggling with reading himself, he's now a powerful voice for adult literacy, encouraging others to learn without shame. Suzie, too, has stepped forward. Through her book and heartfelt interviews, she reaches out to women who've endured silent, controlling relationships, helping them find the courage to speak. Their story isn't built on declarations, it's built on presence, patience, and unspoken understanding. In a world obsessed with noise, Jay Blades and Suzie Fletcher found healing in silence. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe for more untold truths. Sometimes silence says everything. Let's honor that together. Thanks for watching.